could be your gumdrop. I could be your gumdrop.
I don't give a fuck till the motherfucking beat drop.
Gumdrop, baby pop, girly pop, ice pop. Gumdrop, baby pop, girly pop, ice pop. Gumdrop, baby pop, girly pop, ice pop. Gumdrop, baby pop, girly pop, pop, pop. Now make it pop, now make it pop, now make it pop, 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 pop. Now make it pop, now make it pop, now make it pop, 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 pop. I could be your gumdrop. I could be your gumdrop.
Lollipop Chainsaw is a video game, and not just any video game, it's a game that fucks. It is, in short, a total attack on the senses in the best way possible. While the game stayed trapped on the 360 and PS3 for the last 12 years, it has finally been remastered and re-released. I'm not joking when I say that this was my most anticipated title of 2024, and now all I really have to look forward to is the Metal Gear Solid remake. So, I think this is a perfect time to rant about how it's also one of my favorite games of all time, and I can already hear some dweeb on their keyboard commenting, "But Jeff, if this game is at best a 6 out of 10, how can you say it's better than Baldur's Gate 3 or Red Dead Redemption 2? Listen, I'm not saying that it's a 10 out of 10, but we all have that one thing that nobody really understands or even likes. God can come down from heaven and tell you that your favorite thing sucks, and you still don't care. It is your favorite thing because it speaks to you in some abstract language that only you understand. So yeah, for me it's a cheerleader with a chainsaw fighting zombies, and there's rainbow sparkles, and it's fucking cool! So bear with me while I yell at you about why I loved this game back when it came out in 2012, and what I think of the new RePOP remaster, and I'll also tell you about the interesting development that this game had, because I think it's really important to think about it when considering the sum of its parts. And while this video isn't sponsored in any way, I would love for as many people as possible to play this game, so I'll even throw in a giveaway for a digital copy on the platform of your choice. Stick around for that. With that being said, let's talk about how this game even managed to get made. When you think of a game like Lollipop Chainsaw, where a high school cheerleader uses the power of rainbows and sparkles to chainsaw her way through hordes of the undead while carrying the decapitated but magically alive head of her boyfriend everywhere and being part of a monster hunting family trying to take down basically Satan summoned by an edgy emo kid and listening to tons of raunchy and low-key outdated jokes along the way, you may even wonder, who the fuck thinks of stuff like this? Well, let me introduce you to the legendary weirdo Goichi Suda, aka Suda51. Suda51 is a director, designer, and visionary of not just Lollipop Chainsaw, but other weird classics that you might have played like Killer 7, No More Heroes, Killer is Dead, Shadows of the Damned, and motherfucking Frog Minutes! But that's not the only freaky individual who worked on this game. Quick, take a guess. Who was the director of Guardians of the Galaxy 1 through 3, Suicide Squad, the good one, and now is the current CEO of DC Studios? Did you guess James Gunn? See, James Gunn wasn't necessarily at the peak of his directorial ladder yet in 2012, but he was being noticed by Suda51 for his more raunchy style of films like Movie 43 and other shit I didn't watch. It was this type of balls-to-the-wall approach that Gunn showed throughout, and he used this experience to help translate Lollipop Chainsaw to English humor while also directing the cast of English voice actors. A cast including Tara Strong, who you may know for many of her iconic roles in your childhood, acting as the main protagonist Juliet Starling, a quippy, confident, and overpowered high school cheerleader whose 18th birthday just happened to land on the day a zombie outbreak started. She's joined by a colorful cast of characters, mainly her boyfriend, Nick Carlisle. That's a Twilight reference. Or rather, his severed head which she had cut off to bring back to life through magic to save him from a zombie bite. The rest of the cast consists of Juliet's mom, dad, and 2 sisters, Juliet's sensei, Murakawa sensei, and a whole band of edgelords and actual demon lords, each serving as a league of zombie bosses that you'll be fighting against to stop the zombie apocalypse. This is all part of an idea that Suda51 thought up of, and I'm quoting here, on the toilet. Inspired by the likes of Buffy the Vampire Slayer and the Japanese Machine Girl in an attempt to fuse American and Japanese culture with a zombie game unlike any other. See, the early 2010s were in no shortage of zombie media, and much less so in the games department. Red Dead Undead Nightmare, COD Zombies, Dead Island, No More Room in Hell, The Walking Dead, Plague Inc., DayZ, State of Decay, The Last of Us. Many of these games came out in the same 5-year span, and to this day there is at least one big zombie game a year. Suda wanted in on this craze, but he didn't want to go about it in the same tired way where you would play a horror-centric game as a typical badass, no-nonsense protagonist. Suda thought, hey, what if this game had tons of pop culture in it, and when you chop a zombie's head off, a rainbow spits out where the blood would be? And when you really think about it, a game as colorful and bombastic as this one in a time where most games just looked like... well, it was sure to stand out. So with that much of the context now framing the game, let me talk about why I loved this game in 2012, and why I still love this game today. Truth be told, it's not because I was barely breaking into a Wii-gooning teen and saw a game with a hot cheerleader on the cover. Rather, on a random trip to GameStop, I walked in with a crisp $20 bill in my pocket with a mission to grab a game for my Xbox 360, and I heavily enjoyed big AAA games like Gears of War, Assassin's Creed, Mass Effect, but everything on the pre-owned shelf started looking familiar, until I saw this funky looking box staring back at me, almost as if to say, hey, I'm quirky, I'm not like other games. I'll admit, I was really into the zombie craze too. Playing COD Zombies with friends and watching Zombieland with my family are both core memories of my exposure to the genre. Plus, something about it just spoke to me. I really just had the box and the title to go off of. I'll admit, I was skeptical myself about the game on the way home, but booting it up, I could immediately see what this game was putting down. Funky music, a comic-inspired art style, and a combat loop that was unlike anything I'd ever played before. It only took the first 10 minutes for me to truly connect with the game. A quick cutscene to set up the story, and right into the action and weird, edgy humor. You wouldn't necessarily get away controversy-free with making a game like Lollipop Chainsaw today. I mean, shit, Suda barely got away with it back then, but this game isn't trying to hold back when it comes to what's appropriate or correct. And while the humor of the game was a bit dated even for 2012, Justin Bieber jokes only go so far, but the game still has a lot more of those wholesome or clean jokes, or witty one-liners that can win you over. Most of these happen between the two protagonists, Juliet and Nick.
What's your favorite color, Nick?
Blue? No, green.
Awesome. I love learning about you.
I fucked up. It's yellow. Juliet, where are we going?
I need to find Morikawa-sensei. He'll know what to do.
Who's that?
Morikawa-sensei. He's my sensei.
A sensei? But like a teacher?
I didn't know you spoke Japanese, Nick.
Well,
Osekoi, watashi mo Nihiko o hanashimasu.
I can't speak Japanese, Juliet. I just know that one word.
Aw, your simple innocence is one of the most attractive things about you.
Yeah.
You're like a kitten that doesn't speak Japanese.
Yeah, okay.
Really, after replaying it in the RePOP version, I realized that this game isn't as edgy by today's standards, and that being said, everyone has different tolerances for how dark they like their humor, and I quite enjoy most of what's on here on display for myself. So to really explain what it is that I love about Lollipop Chainsaw, I'll have to break it down into a few sections, starting first with the combat. For me, most of the games I played as a kid were the sort of Nintendo games that other kids grew up on. Zelda, Mario, and well, anything with Spider-Man on the cover too. Even as a kid, something about the pacing and physicality of these games was something that spoke to me. I didn't know it then, but now I know that character action games are my absolute jam. Lollipop Chainsaw was my reintroduction to the character action game genre after years of games in the shooter and RPG genres. The game wasn't just about swinging a chainsaw around on slow, stumbling zombies that attack one at a time. It was much, much more than that. And it goes back to the vision Suda51 had when crafting the protagonist. Suda wasn't thinking, oh, a cheerleader would be sexy and make so much money. No, Suda wanted to make a strong character that moved in exciting ways for a video game. A chainsaw wielded by your generic action dude would be too slow and realistic, but when you introduce the explosive energy and agility of a cheerleader and introduce the gruesomeness of a chainsaw, you get something much more engaging for a video game. Instead, it builds off of combos and special moves that put you right into Juliet's shoes. Typical character action game stuff. Your light attack is a series of fast pom-pom hits to stun zombies. Your heavy attack is an arching swing of your chainsaw to cut off limbs, and you even have an extra variation of a low swing to attack crawling zombies or chop legs off. And when it came time to evade or change your position, you can quite literally do all sorts of flips, cartwheels, and rolls, and jumps over zombies to get out of trouble. And since this game is a character action game first and foremost, you can put together any combination of these moves and even unlock new moves to change things up. You'll also end up unlocking all sorts of abilities throughout the game. You get attachments for your chainsaw that give you a sort of dash attack, a cannon attachment that basically gives you a revolver, and a few tag team abilities to swing Nick around or even just shake him around for more coins. You can kinda get away with button mashing, but the real dopamine hits come from the tenderizing zombies with pom-pom attacks and lining them up to set up a row of decapitations that trigger the sparkle hunting bonus. Doing this with 3 or more zombies nets you bonus coins that you use to unlock stuff like costumes, concept art, skills, and even character upgrades. The more zombies you get, the better the rewards obviously, and it can feel really good when you time your attacks just right and get combo after combo of Sparkle Hunt with this slow-mo animation. And yeah, at times it can be a bit janky with detecting which zombie you want to hit, since there are usually a dozen at a screen at any one time, but it's nothing worth uninstalling over or anything. But if there was one thing to complain about, for some it might be the story. Listen, I'll be the first to admit that Lollipop Chainsaw doesn't have the best story. It's a 6 to 8 hour game at most, where most of it is combat and silly jokes, and it encourages you to replay it with unlockables and a scoring system. It's also clearly inspired by the style of zombie B-movies that allow for more of the charm of the game to seep through the cracks. That being said, I don't think a video game needs a crazy good story to be a good game. I'll say it once and I'll say it again. A good game is good as long as it made you feel something playing it. Whether that be sadness or anger or revenge, whatever it may be, it goes for all art. And you can also say that a game with a great story still falls flat as a game because it fails to have interesting gameplay. Lollipop Chainsaw is a video game first and foremost. You don't need to know any of these characters' life goals and ambitions to play the game. Juliet is a high schooler zombie hunter who literally just turned 18. She's a badass cheerleader who comes across as ditzy and superficial, but she is ultimately the strongest and most capable character in the cast. In the same vein, the main villain is an emo kid that basically only exists to be a catalyst for the story. You don't find out until the end that it's because he felt ignored and estranged by Juliet and her classmates, and so he just started the end of the world. It's the sense that while yes, the world is ending and there are horrors from hell taking over, it's still Juliet's birthday first. And the most stressful thing for her right now isn't the zombie apocalypse, it's introducing her boyfriend to her family for the first time. The zombie apocalypse might as well be just another Friday. The game never takes itself seriously, and it shows. Rather than trying to make everything work, Suda51 and James Gunn just threw everything at the wall and worked with whatever stuck. And while yes, media literacy these days is a joke, the game itself rarely has a deeper meaning. When asked on the dynamic between Juliet and Nick's relationship and if it had any deeper meaning, Suda struggled to really find an answer other than Nick would do anything for Juliet and they both love each other very much. The game is simply a turn your brain off and enjoy the ride type of game. The writing is on the walls, and if you don't like it, then go somewhere else. And if you think I'm wrong, that's literally what Suda51 actually said.
And I think it's something, if they could just enjoy it and kind of empty their own heads and get into the game and have fun.
This is just another Saturday morning cartoon for me, and I enjoyed every second of its crazy writing and sometimes off-base jokes, simply because it was like nothing I'd ever seen before and it kept me guessing. Speaking of keeping you guessing, minigames are becoming a more common trend in video games nowadays, even in remakes of games that previously didn't have them, and Lollipop Chainsaw has quite a few. You see, most games use these to pad out playtime, or entice players to engage the world for a reward like XP or currency or items. Not all games are guilty of the superficial minigame, and Suda51 is an example of that. Lots of its games feature minigames, and Lollipop Chainsaw is chief among them. Zombie basketball, zombie baseball, a tractor minigame, and many more. These are all part of Suda's philosophy that minigames should represent things that can occur in the world that these characters live in. Juliet doesn't just cheer for Nick to make a mechanic out of it, she does it because it's core to her character as a cheerleader. It's who she is. It's what she knows. I love these sort of diegetic minigames that don't take you out of the world. Like, other games are like, yeah, you do need to save the world, but why not go bowling? The other thing I like is a variation of these. Lollipop Chainsaw is a short game, and even though you may see a minigame more than once, the sheer fact that the game keeps you on your toes and that the gameplay loop seldom gets stale is just another way that it tickles my silly little goblin gamer brain. Not all of them are winners, like standing still on a slow-moving bus to shoot an occasional boulder, but overall, again, the game is short enough that nothing really overstays its welcome. And to complete this total attack on the senses, Lollipop Chainsaw's soundtrack is a beautiful blend of the pop to rock spectrum to listen to, with a boss each reminiscent of a subgenre of rock, and Juliet as the literal bubblegum teen pop counter to that. It serves as a tone setter for the rest of the world. Jimmy Urine, yes, urine as in piss, is the lead singer and songwriter of a rock band called Mindless Self-Indulgence. Personally, never heard of him, but he also voices one of the bosses in the game, and he was also the composer of a lot of the original songs in Lollipop Chainsaw. Unfortunately, I do have to call out that the soundtrack in RePOP does not live up fully to the old soundtrack. This is just because of the nature of licensing of these songs. The licenses of the old tracks expired, so more original songs had to be created, and oftentimes they just lack the spunk. But how can you live up to this old track list? Hey Mickey, Cherry Bomb, Rock and Roll, like Skrillex is in this game. and many more. If that isn't a stacked list for a game soundtrack, I don't know what is. Thankfully, the Lollipop song manages to stay in as a theme for the shop, so while the RePOP version doesn't quite live up in terms of the soundtrack, I don't think it reflects on the quality of the original, which deserves to be praised for the vibes it set. I could probably say a lot more, but I'm not a musician of any kind, so I'll just end that there. So, while I love the original version of this game, how is the new RePOP version? And is it worth picking up? I think so. It's pretty great actually, with a few caveats. See, Lollipop Chainsaw has always had a hint of jank. It didn't have the biggest budget, and I'm sure it wasn't made by the most experienced developers in the world. That being said, this remake actually manages to preserve the competent parts of the game, while also making it more accessible to new audiences through a handful of gameplay changes. One of the biggest differences is the combat. In the 360 version, it felt like there was a small amount of input delay in the combat that made the learning curve just a little steeper to get your timing right. Now this remake is much more responsive, and it's basically 1-to-1 when you press a button. The other difference in combat is that, wow, the zombies are way easier to defeat now. I remember mostly relying on cheesing the zombies by stunning them, usually by drop kicking them into a wall and going for the instant kill, and yeah, even on normal difficulty, this was on the harder side of combat that I think games just kinda did back then. Zombies were just tankier, and it felt like the chainsaw was just kinda slashing rather than cutting. Now in RePOP, almost every basic zombie goes down in 3 chainsaw attacks. You can tell that the first hit chops off a limb, the second one does a bit more, and the third one is usually the decapitation. Other than that, Juliet's combos seem to flow just a little better. The best example I have is that the pom-pom attack used to be a quick 1-2-3 pause, but now it's more like a 1-2-3-4 that just flows a little bit better. There are probably just a few more subtle differences that I haven't quite picked up on, but these are just the ones that stuck out to me from my recent playthroughs of both. The other big difference in RePOP is the graphics. The original version of this game was doing a lot with visual effects like sparkles and blood while keeping multiple zombies on screen, so it ran at a capped 720p at 30 FPS. As a result of that, the world wasn't necessarily realistic and more so bled over into its comic-inspired art style to outline characters and use flatter textures. The most jarring difference here is that by using the power of modern hardware, the game leans more into the realism than the comic style. The environment is more textured, puddles have reflections, lighting is much brighter. It's almost an uncanny version of its former self, but I think it manages to just barely pull back enough that it retains its original style. That is to say that really none of the content of the game has changed at all. This is due to what the developer called fan requests, to keep as much of Lollipop Chainsaw the same as it originally was. That means no big changes to the story, the writing, the maps, or even any censorship. Yes, I know you're here for those costumes, but whatever, man. But I do think that this is what RePOP's biggest strength is. It's just a remastering of that game with some new key differences to make the game feel fresh to old players and intuitive to new ones. And Lollipop Chainsaw RePOP still adds a few things that I commend it for. First and foremost, character customization is now just a bit more overhaul. Previously, where you could only change Juliet's costume from a brief selection, now RePOP has 30 costumes, each of which you can change Juliet's hair color from one of 5 options, as well as 5 chainsaw skins that also apparently have buff abilities, for a total of 750 technically possible combinations. While I don't want to say that this is groundbreaking and that you really shouldn't be praising 750 when you really only added 5 hair colors and 5 chainsaws, I do think it's better than what it was, so I'll give it that. Lastly, RePOP adds RePOP mode that is basically the same game but with a much bigger focus on the colorful pop art style rather than the original pop with a side of gore. It's still the exact same game, but with a few other small changes that largely aren't worth mentioning but worth experiencing. Like, instead of kicking a zombie head in the beginning, Juliet kicks a football with a zombie head picture on it. It's more like a funny thing to look at. Okay, so that's really it. Lollipop Chainsaw for me manages to not only stand out in a crowd, but stand out even with itself. In my personal opinion, this game is a masterclass in the word contrast. The contrast of a high school against a zombie apocalypse. The contrast of a cheerleader with a chainsaw. The contrast of pop and hard rock. The contrast of brutal horror and raunchy comedy. If hearing me out this far hasn't sold you on the game, then no worries. I know we all have different tastes and tolerances, and Lollipop Chainsaw will rarely do what it did to me to others. Still, it seems that it has found a niche audience that looks back fondly on this game, and it did sell over 1 million copies, and while it may not have been the huge commercial or critical success it could have been, it did have enough people asking for the game to come back, and I'm just really glad it did. For $40, I have no complaints. I mean, I'm obviously biased here, and I'm really deep in the nostalgia pool. But yeah, hopefully you pick up this game at some point. I know this review hasn't been totally technical, and it was never meant to be. Granted, yes, it may have a few technical issues, but I just hope that you got something out of me telling you about one of my favorite games and my guilty pleasure. If you don't buy RePOP for whatever reason, or you don't like some of the changes that were made, you can still technically find copies of this game out there, and hey, by all means, do what you gotta do. So really, that's it. I hope you enjoy Lollipop Chainsaw as much as I do if you give it a try. If you do, let me know, and if you don't, feel free to let me know that as well. Till next time, I've been Joseph, and I love Lollipop Chainsaw. I hope you learned something today or something. I don't know, I hope this was worth something.
I didn't really learn anything, but...
Oh yeah, I mentioned I was going to do a giveaway. Comment on what you think you'll like about the game, and finish the comment with, I really, really, really want Lollipop Chainsaw. And yeah, I'll announce a winner sometime in the next week. The winner will obviously be randomly selected, and yeah, that's really it. See ya.